Good afternoon, Professor Samanyanga Lessem. Thank you so much for joining us today. We wanted to have this opportunity to have a short, brief conversation with you about your upcoming presentation in the SCMLi learning series that we've been running for a while. Before we go there, a brief introduction. Professor Samanyanga Lessem is the co-founder of the Transform Community Associates, which is a global network of educators and transformation-oriented institutions. I hope I said that correctly. With that, Professor Lessem, thank you so much for joining and taking the time to speak to us briefly. Your presentation, which is going to focus on the role of spiritual capital in developing so-called communiversities. Could you maybe briefly explain what you mean by the term communiversity?
Okay, I'll start with what a communiversity is not, which is it's not, as often seen, a place where you run courses for communities, and hence communiversity. That to us is useful, but is frankly fairly trivial, because what we're after is to fundamentally transform the very functioning of a university. Why? Because university is basically geared to educating, sometimes also research, individuals. And we reckon, particularly from my own background in the so-called developing world, that is fundamentally dysfunctional. It's dysfunctional for two reasons. The one is that people see education as a means to pursue their own individual agenda, which often is separated from the agenda of their community and society. It's just to get on for themselves in the world, in life. And secondly, because if you want to achieve something of great proportions, something transformational, you can never do it on your own. You always have to do it together with others. So the very idea of education for the individual for us is kind of for the birds, right? So the very basis, the foundation of a communiversity is communal learning. It's enabling communities of 5, 10, 15, 50,000 people, in one case, which I might mention later, 300,000 people to actually learn and develop as a starting point. So in a sense, that already is a fundamental departure from a university as we know it. And of course, you then have to develop processes to facilitate that. But in a sense, that's only a start, because communities are intrinsically local. And from our observations and experience around the world, to achieve something fundamentally transformative, you need to involve the local and the global. There has to be an interaction between one culture and another, one society and another, between a smaller community and a larger world. So the next step, in a sense, is to engage purposefully on what we call a transformation journey, whereby through that journey, you link the local with the global, you link one world with another. Now that transformation journey, incidentally, is in a sense the most individual end of the communiversity. So I'm contradicting myself, because you start communal, but then you need to move individual, because then we're in the realm of spirituality. How you harness your own spirituality to create a better world. And that involves a profound deepening of your understanding of yourself and your world and your ability to interconnect with others. So that's what we call the transformation journey, which is relatively more individualized. So we've got rid of the notion of doing a course, a degree. We're engaging in learning communities, and we're taking part in the transformation journey. Now, the problem with the local and the local global is it's not stable. It's not consolidated. In order to consolidate, you need to move into the institutional realm. The institutional realm is what we call the research academy. Now, of course, people would say, yes, but every second university has a research academy. Our argument is twofold in relation to what we mean by research academy. Firstly, it needs to build on what came before, locally and locally globally. So the research academy has to be rooted in Guatemalan soils, or in my own case, rooted in Zimbabwean soils, albeit having rooted in Zimbabwean soils, I need to rub shoulders with the rest of the world. Most knowledge, as it's developed and created in the world, is not of that kind. It's not rooted in a particular world and consciously connecting the indigenous and the exogenous. That's the role of the research academy, in our case, in particular, in relation to economics and to enterprise, to achieve that end. And then finally, and that's the fourfold of the communiversity, you need to interact with and rub shoulders with transformative enterprises, which you call laboratories. So you have the community, you have the journey, you have the academy, and you have the laboratory, and all of those interact and form a communiversity, located in a particular place.
Interesting. That's a fascinating concept. Could you give us an example of something like that on the ground? Does it exist, and how does it take shape? What expressions does it have?
A pilot communiversity is the one we established with our colleague Father Lessem Adodo in rural Nigeria. He incidentally took part in our PhD program. We use our PhD program historically to further evolve these communiversities. He's a Benedictine monk, but he's an unusual monk in that he's created the largest producer of herbal medicines in Africa. It's called Pax Herbals. So Pax Herbals is adjacent to the Benedictine monastery. And Lessem Adodo himself is unusual because he is a Benedictine monk, but he's deeply Yoruba. He's very much a Yoruba African and very knowledgeable about his African context. So living within his community of farmers, 40,000 farmers who service the laboratory, which is Pax Herbal. So immediately what you see is you have a laboratory, you have a spiritual center, a source of transformation, a Benedictine source of transformation, and you have the Iwo community. We then worked with Lessem Adodo, and we are still working with him during the course of his PhD journey to establish a research academy, which in a sense could, embody the knowledge that was being co-created through his laboratory, through his community, through people engaging in transformation journeys. And to that end, we co-engaged with a remarkable philosophy department, the University of Calabar in the east coast of Nigeria, which has a whole body of what's called complementary philosophers who draw on indigenous, they're all incidentally Catholic, but they also draw on indigenous knowledge, particularly Igbo in sense, not Yoruba, to develop a philosophy, which we then have combined with the economy that's been created by Lessem Adodo to create this research institute. And that is work in progress. It's not a finished story. The monastery is alive and well. The community is alive and well. Pax Herbals is alive and well. He has a global reputation for what he's doing. The Research Academy is work in progress. That's one example of such an institution. And incidentally, institutionally, spiritual capital-wise, it draws peripherally on the two sources. The one is the Catholic Benedictine source, and the other is the Yoruba source. The Yoruba source very much rooted in what Lessem calls nature power and healing radiance. Those are two terms he's come up with to underlie his spiritual capital, which is then embedded in Pax Herbals alongside the monastery and the Iwo community.
Fascinating. So how do these type of endeavors in terms of their outcome and maybe communal and societal and economical manifestation, how do they differ from what we traditionally see? Do you see any significant differences in terms of interaction, maybe involvement of people, wealth distribution? How does it differ from the capitalist system, so to speak?
So two elements. The first is in terms of differing from the university system, then I'll come to the capitalist system. Conventionally, we find you have lots of community activists, you have lots of people going on spiritual journeys, you have researchers and educators, and you have, if you like, enterprises, right? And they all paddle their own canoe. Sometimes one or other meets, you might have the two together, but we never find all four coming together. And to the extent that all four come together, you have something very different from what we conventionally recognize as a university. In terms of overcoming the capitalist system, our argument is the capitalist system is basically created by, if you like, 1% of the world, right? 1% of the world, proverbially in the West. We even distinguish the North from the West. Being of European heritage, I frankly don't see Northern Europe as quintessentially capitalist. It's just sold out. It's sold out to America and an emerging China, and it's become capitalist. But in its essence, the Scandinavians, even the Germans, I don't see them as capitalistic. So to the extent that the communiversity draws on tens, if not hundreds of parts of the world, we by definition are overthrowing the capitalist system because we're drawing on roots which are very much other than Protestant individualistic capitalist roots. And to that extent, we now have evolved, if you like, 4 forms of emerging economy from the south, the east, the north, and the west. The southern one being communalism, the eastern one being the solidarity economy, like solidarity economy. The northern one, very much influenced by Rudolf Steiner, being the associative economy. And it's only the West where the evolved form of capitalism is becoming sustainable development. But back to your question, what is the vehicle that enables those new economic forms to be created, infused with spiritual capital? It came to us late in life because we started with an integral economy, an integral enterprise, an integral development, and integral research. We said there has to be a communiversity which brings that about because the politicians and the corporates aren't going to do it.
Fascinating. So I'm very much intrigued by where this is going. I am going to be looking forward to the conversation we'll have on the 15th of February, when hopefully you will dive deeper into these notions of a communiversity and how it relates to economy and spiritual capital in particular. Thank you so much for this little preview, and we're looking forward to having you with us soon.
My pleasure. Look forward to it.